Hello and thank you for attending my presentation. My name is Eleftherios Papachristos and I'm a member of the Human-Centered Computing Group at Aalborg University. I will present a paper with the title The Trained Panel Method and its Application in HCI Research that I have written together with Dimitrios Raptis and Anas Broun. So the main goal of this work is to demonstrate the value of the trained panel method and how it can be applied in HCI research and practice. The structure of my presentation will follow 4 steps. First, I will provide a description of this method and its roots in food science and sensory science. Then I will present a case study in which the method has been adapted and applied in HCI context, and specifically for the evaluation of smartwatches. Following the case study, I'm going to talk about how this method compares with other expert-based techniques in HCI, and I finally will present possible application areas. So I will now describe the trained panel method on an abstract level first, before showing a concrete example in which it has been applied. So the trained panel method is an expert-based method, and the goal is to derive a comprehensive description of a sample of existing artifacts or prototypes. The goal is not to generalize, but to describe and provide a deep understanding of a specific domain. Some of the main characteristics is that it utilizes experts to identify important design characteristics within a domain. It is descriptive and not evaluative in nature, and the goal is to reach a consensus among terminology and profiles of artifacts. So the purpose is to identify and quantify the intensities of a product characteristics that are perceived, meaning that they cannot be measured instrumentally, and are not affective, meaning that they do not entail a personal preference of the assessor. It is an adaptation of a descriptive analysis method that has a long and rich tradition in disciplines such as sensor and food science, marketing, and audio engineering. The premise of the descriptive analysis method in food science stems from the realization that consumers may be perfectly capable to report whether they like some type of food, but not to explain why. The reason may be that they lack the sensitivity to evaluate small variations in, for example, viscosity or acidity, or that they may not have the necessary vocabulary to explain sensory experiences. Experts, on the other hand, have been trained all their lives to be able to create taste, olfactory, and auditory profiles of products. Many research approaches in food science are aimed to combine consumer preferences about specific products with expert-generated sensory profiles through descriptive analysis. Preference mapping and partial least square regression are two common techniques that are used to combine these two datasets and allow for the identification of sensor attributes that drive consumer preferences. We adapted this method to the context of digital artifacts by keeping many of its characteristics. First, it involves experts in the specific or relevant application domains. Second, participants are engaged in creating and refining the descriptor lists so that in the end only those that discriminate and are commonly understood are included. Third, the method follows an iterative process of discussions, ratings, and feedback until consensus is achieved. Finally, after the training phase is finished, the participants create profiles for the artifact in the sample by using well-defined and commonly agreed upon set of attributes. I will now describe how we applied the trained panel method to the case of smartwatches. The rationale for this choice was that this particular wearable technology has both traditional visual user interface and physical characteristics. Our recruitment goal was to select a group of people who would be able to detect and conceptualize smartwatch design characteristics. So we recruited 8 participants from various disciplines who would have some previous experience with wearable technology, aiming to create a group with diverse backgrounds. So their professional backgrounds were visual design, interaction design, usability, techno-anthropology, manufacturing, and electrical engineering. The average age was 32.7 years old. As sample material, we included 6 smartwatches from different brands and styles. Our selection strategy was to involve as much variety in design and quality characteristics as possible in a relatively small sample. Apart from those that you can see here, we also included 4 devices that were used during the training phase. The trained panel study was held in a round table format. The smartwatches were placed in the middle of the table and each panelist could examine them for as long as they needed. Each panelist was given a laptop to provide the ratings, and the data collection was handled by a web application that was developed for this purpose. During session breaks, the study conductor used a specialized open source application called PanelCheck to create visualizations of panel performance. So feedback about the performance was provided to the panelists at the beginning of each new session by showing them several data visualizations on a big screen mounted on the meeting room wall. We followed 5 major stages. At the beginning of the study, our panelists had to undergo a training session to refine the descriptor list. The training session can be roughly subdivided into 3 stages. In the first stage, participants were introduced to the goal and the purpose of the study. In the second, we presented an initial list of descriptors prepared beforehand through literature review on smartwatches. These descriptors were then used to rate the training sample of 4 smartwatches. Panelists were encouraged to add or remove descriptors, and subsequently each of those descriptors were repeatedly discussed until the panelists agreed about the importance of each of those and its definition. Afterwards, in the follow-up rating session, participants were asked to rate the final sample of these 6 smartwatches I showed you before. Panelists' performance was continuously monitored and appropriate feedback was given where needed. The whole process, including breaks and feedback sessions, took 8 hours and it was conducted in a single day. Each attribute had to fulfill 2 evaluation criteria to be included in the final list: discrimination ability and panelist agreement. For example, during the evaluation, we saw high disagreement for the descriptor noisiness. In discussions, it became clear that some participants took the term metaphorically, for example, noise design, while others literally how much noise it makes when it's rattled. Therefore, we decided to split the descriptor into 2 separate ones and update the list. During later stages, the physical noisiness descriptor was also split again into button noisiness and bracelet noisiness. However, 2 of the 3 noisiness descriptors did not discriminate significantly among our smartwatches and were therefore removed from the final list. Several attributes went through a process like this. The discrimination ability of the descriptors can be assessed through mixed model ANOVAs, and for panel agreements, not a single but several techniques can be used to identify descriptors that are a source of a disagreement between our panelists. For example, box plots, histograms, profile plots, Excel plots, and Tucker-1 correlation plots. These plots were presented to participants during the feedback session. Here you can see an example of that. It is one of the visualizations we use to provide feedback about agreements, and it's called an Excel plot. In this example, you can see an Excel plot for the descriptors weights and squareness. For the descriptor weight, there was considerable panel disagreement, as you can see, from what manifests as cracks in the Excel. Shape, on the other hand, had considerable less disagreement, as you can see, because it creates a more smooth shape. Another visualization technique we used are called consonance plots, and in this example you can see the plots for the descriptor formality and seriousness. The left plot shows general agreements among participants, indicating that they all had a common understanding about this descriptor, and on the right the seriousness plot shows general disagreement about it. Here you can see the final list of 22 attributes and their descriptors. Throughout the process, we removed from the initial set of 36 attributes 3 due to low discrimination ability and 11 due to lack of consensus in our panel about their meaning. Using participant ratings on these 22 attributes, we were able to create a descriptive profiles of our 6 sample smartwatches. To simplify and visualize smartwatch design space and the descriptive attributes, we created this attribute map through principal component analysis. And this map can be used to reveal latent structure in panel perceptions and important attributes that significantly differentiate stimuli from each other. I will now describe how the trained panel method compares to other techniques in HCI, and I will also discuss advantages and disadvantages. Expert-based methods in HCI research vary considerably in terms of purpose, outcomes, and application areas. Experts are used, for example, in heuristic evaluation to assess compliance of user interfaces with a predefined set of rules or heuristics. The goal is to evaluate the design and improve the user's interface on specific quality dimension. The panel method aims to get a non-evaluative descriptor on a profile for a set of artifacts. Also, the descriptor list is not predefined and it's developed every time to uniquely fit the application domain in question. Delphi studies have many similarities with the trained panel method. It also uses experts in an iterative approach of multiple phases of discussions and feedback until consensus is reached. However, the purpose of Delphi studies is not to profile a set of artifacts, but it is to make future predictions and forecasts about the future of a specific technology, or to extract guidelines from domain experts. Experts are also used in the first stages of scale development. The goal is to use experts to generate items, adjectives that can be describe a phenomenon or a quality. Experts only brainstorm and generate items. In contrast, the trained panel method experts are also responsible for evaluating the fitness of the items in the subsequent stages. The most important advantage of this method is that it provides certainty that participants understood and used the attributes in the same way. When we ask naive participants in evaluation studies to rate something on a scale, they likely use different cues and strategies to accomplish the task. For example, if we ask them rate an object symmetry, they may use horizontal, vertical, or even two-line symmetry cues to assess it. In the trained panel method, those differences can be identified during the training phase. Second, the method is flexible and can be applied in many different contexts. And finally, specificity. Using standardized scales could be an alternative approach in some circumstances, but the results would reflect generic attributes that may or may not be important in a specific domain. With the panel method, the factors emerge from the artifact sample, making the method adaptable to a specific domain. Of course, there are also some disadvantages, and the main one is that it is an intensive and time-consuming method. It also requires a conductor that is able to guide the process and to provide appropriate feedback to the panelists. It also requires multiple artifacts, which can be a problem for new products if multiple prototypes are not available. And finally, it requires experts. However, studies have shown that effective panel sessions can be held with naive assessors too, as long as they undergo a more rigorous training phase. So now, for the final section of this presentation, I will present some application areas in which I think that the trained panel method can be advantageous. So the method can be applied to any application domain as long as several artifacts can be identified that are not identical and vary in some meaningful way. For example, it has already been applied in evaluation of visual and physical design, for example, websites, or as we have seen in this example here, wearable technology. We believe it can be also a valuable method for evaluating multimodal or multi-sensory interfaces, such as ambient devices that are using chemical sense of taste or smell. In addition, we believe with some adaptations and adjustments, the method could be used to evaluate concepts with no physical manifestation. For example, it could be used to profile the character or personality of voice assistants based on audio assessment, voice tonality, and content of responses. Or it could be used to assess the social media presence of institutions or companies by selecting samples of posts from a specific period. It could also be applied in the design and evaluation of AI systems. For instance, it is common practice to use crowd workers to annotate training data in a supervised learning process. The trained panel method could be used to develop appropriate label descriptors or as a learning tool to train annotators. In the future, we intend to test the method in the aforementioned context, and also we intend to investigate if it could be adapted to accommodate AI system evaluation regarding issues such as fairness or bias. Thank you very much for your attention.